Pregnant mother bear collapsed in the garbage. What this human baby did put everyone in tears. Let us know where you're watching from. The night was unusually cold for early spring in the small town of Pinewood, where the forest met civilization in an uneasy truce. Streetlights cast eerie shadows across the row of garbage bins lining Cedar Lane, their contents spilling onto the wet pavement. Rain had been falling steadily all evening, washing away the day's warmth and leaving behind a bone-chilling dampness that seemed to seep into everything. In the modest blue house at the end of the cul-de-sac, 15-month-old Lily Morgan slept soundly in her crib, her tiny chest rising and falling with each peaceful breath. Her parents, Thomas and Rebecca Morgan, had fallen asleep on the couch downstairs, exhausted after a long day. The television flickered silently, casting blue-white light across their tired faces. Outside, something large moved in the shadows. A massive mother bear, her belly swollen with unborn cubs, limped slowly toward the overturned garbage cans. Her fur was matted and dirty, clinging to her emaciated frame like a poorly fitting coat. Hunger had driven her from the safety of the forest, deeper and deeper into human territory over the past few weeks. Tonight, desperation had brought her to Cedar Lane. The bear's breathing came in labored gasps as she pawed weakly at a plastic bag, tearing it open to reveal discarded food scraps. She devoured them frantically, her body trembling with exhaustion. Something was wrong, terribly wrong. The pregnancy was taking its toll, but there was more. Perhaps an injury or illness had weakened her, making each movement a struggle. Upstairs in the blue house, little Lily suddenly opened her eyes. She sat up in her crib, listening intently to a sound no human ears had registered, the suffering of the creature outside. The toddler stood on wobbly legs, gripping the bars of her crib, her gaze fixed on the window where raindrops traced silver paths down the glass. A flash of lightning illuminated the yard below, revealing the massive bear as she suddenly stumbled, her legs giving way beneath her enormous weight. With a soft whimper that would have broken the hardest heart, she collapsed beside the garbage bins, her body splayed awkwardly across the wet pavement. Her eyes, filled with a mother's fear and pain, stared toward the house as if pleading for help that would never come. Inside, Lily's small fingers worked at the latch of her crib, a latch her parents thought was beyond her capabilities. With determination that seemed impossible for one so young, she freed herself and slid down to the carpeted floor. Her footy pajamas made soft shuffling sounds as she padded across the room and pressed her face against the cool glass of the window. The bear lay motionless now, her labored breathing visible in the frosty air as small clouds of vapor. Something about her suffering called to the child in a language older than words. Lily placed her tiny palm against the window, a gesture of such innocent concern that it seemed to bridge the impossible gap between human child and wild animal. Thunder rumbled in the distance as another storm approached. The neighborhood remained silent, unaware of the drama unfolding in the growing darkness. No one saw the toddler as she turned from the window with purpose in her eyes. No one heard the soft click of the nursery door as she pushed it open, and no one noticed as Lily Morgan began her dangerous journey down the stairs, drawn inexplicably toward a suffering mother whose pain she somehow understood in the deepest, most primal part of her being. What would happen next would change everyone in Pinewood forever, a moment of connection so pure, so unexpected, that not a single witness would recount it without tears streaming down their faces. The old wooden staircase groaned softly under Lily's tiny weight. Her small hand gripped the banister, her determined eyes focused on the distant glow from the kitchen nightlight. She paused at every second step, listening to the strange sounds coming from outside. Sounds that seemed to call to her with an urgency she couldn't understand, but somehow felt deep within her heart. In the living room, Thomas stirred slightly at the faint creak of the stairs but didn't wake. Rebecca's arm draped across his chest, their peaceful breathing continuing in unison, unaware of their daughter's midnight journey. The clock on the mantel ticked steadily. 11:42 p.m. The neighborhood of Pinewood slept soundly, except for one soul too young to comprehend danger, yet somehow old enough to recognize suffering. Outside, the rain had slowed to a gentle patter. The mother bear's massive body shuddered with each labored breath. Her eyes, once fierce and wild, now reflected a glassy resignation. One of her front paws twitched involuntarily, scraping against the rough pavement. She had traveled miles from her territory, driven by hunger that gnawed at her insides like a living thing. The late spring had been unusually harsh, with food scarce in the mountains. Her pregnancy, which should have been a time of abundance, had become a desperate fight for survival. At the bottom of the stairs, Lily hesitated. The front door, her usual exit when playing in the yard with her parents, was locked tight with a deadbolt far above her reach. The toddler's gaze wandered until it settled on the kitchen door that led to the backyard. During the day, Rebecca often left it unlocked for quick trips to the garden. Tonight, in their exhaustion, they had forgotten to secure it. With surprising dexterity, Lily's small fingers reached up for the handle. It took 3 attempts before she managed to turn it, the soft click of the releasing latch seeming impossibly loud in the quiet house. A rush of cold air greeted her as the door swung open, carrying with it the scents of wet earth, pine needles, and something musky and wild. The backyard stretched before her, bathed in the soft silver light of a moon, occasionally visible through breaks in the clouds. Lily stepped onto the damp grass, her footy pajamas quickly becoming soaked. She didn't notice the cold or the wet. Her attention was entirely focused on reaching the side gate that would lead to the front yard where the strange sounds came from. Meanwhile, just 2 houses away, Ethan Marshall was returning home from his late shift at Pinewood Memorial Hospital. The young paramedic had seen plenty of emergencies, but nothing could have prepared him for what he was about to witness. He pulled his truck into the driveway, the headlights briefly illuminating his modest home before he cut the engine. As he stepped out into the damp night air, he heard a sound that made the hair on the back of his neck stand up. The unmistakable whimper of a large animal in distress. Ethan froze, his hand still on the door of his truck. Years of living near the forest had taught him to recognize the wildlife that occasionally wandered into town. That sound. It had to be a bear. His mind quickly assessed the situation. Bear sightings weren't uncommon in Pinewood, but they usually didn't venture this far into the residential area unless desperate or injured. Both scenarios spelled danger. He reached back into his truck and grabbed his powerful flashlight, standard equipment for a first responder in a rural town. As he cautiously moved toward the sound, the beam cut through the misty darkness, revealing nothing at first. Then, as he turned the corner onto Cedar Lane, the light fell upon the massive form of the mother bear, collapsed beside the Morgan family's overturned garbage bins. "Holy shit," Ethan whispered, his trained medical eye immediately noting the bear's distended belly and labored breathing, pregnant and in distress. His first instinct was to call animal control, but as he reached for his phone, something else caught his eye, movement from the side gate of the Morgan house. At first, he couldn't process what he was seeing. A small figure, no more than knee-high, was toddling across the wet grass, heading directly toward the injured bear. The flashlight beam illuminated pale blue pajamas and a head of golden curls that could only belong to the Morgan's little girl. "No!" Ethan's shout echoed through the quiet street as he broke into a sprint. "Lily, stop! But the child either didn't hear or didn't understand. She continued her deliberate journey toward the massive predator, her tiny feet leaving a trail of footprints across the dewy grass. The bear's head lifted slightly at the sound of Ethan's voice, but her attention fixed on the approaching child. Time seemed to slow as Ethan ran. He was still 30 yards away, too far to reach Lily before she reached the bear. His mind raced through horrible possibilities. Even injured, a wild bear could kill a child with one swipe of its powerful paws. He had to do something, anything, to stop what was about to happen. Thomas, Rebecca. He screamed toward the Morgan house, praying they would wake. Help! Your baby! Lights began to flicker on in neighboring houses, awakened by the commotion. Doors opened as curious and concerned residents peered out into the night. But no one was close enough to intervene in the unfolding tragedy. Lily had reached the bear now. Ethan's heart stopped as he watched the toddler extend one tiny hand toward the massive creature's face. In that moment, he was certain he was about to witness something too horrible to comprehend. But what happened next defied everything Ethan thought he knew about wild animals. The mother bear, her eyes filled with pain and exhaustion, did not lash out at the approaching child. Instead, she lowered her massive head to the ground, as if in surrender or acknowledgement of the tiny human before her. And Lily, with the fearlessness that only comes from complete innocence, placed her small palm gently against the bear's wet nose. The world held its breath. Across the street, Jacob Bennett had emerged from his house with his phone already dialing 911. The retired forest ranger had seen many bear encounters in his 30 years of service, but nothing like this. His finger hovered over the call button, his experienced eyes watching intently for any sign of aggression from the animal. "Don't move, little one," he whispered, though he knew Lily couldn't hear him. "Stay very still." Inside the Morgan house, a sudden crash of thunder finally jolted Thomas and Rebecca from their exhausted sleep. Thomas sat up, disoriented, as Rebecca automatically said, "I'll check on Lily." It was their standard response to any nighttime disturbance. One of them would always make sure their daughter was safe. Rebecca's bare feet padded quickly up the stairs. She pushed open the nursery door, her sleepy voice calling, "It's okay, sweetie, just thunder." The words died in her throat as she stared at the empty crib, its side rail mysteriously lowered. In an instant, all traces of sleep vanished from her mind. "Thomas!" Her scream tore through the house. "She's gone! Lily's gone!" Thomas was already on his feet, racing toward the stairs. "Check the bathroom!" he shouted, his voice tight with panic. "I'll look downstairs." He took the stairs 2 at a time, his heart pounding so hard he could feel it in his throat. The kitchen light was still off, but he could feel the cool breeze immediately. His hand fumbled for the switch, and when the light flooded the room, revealing the open back door, his blood turned to ice in his veins. "Rebecca!" he shouted, already running for the door. "The back door is open. She's outside." Outside, the scene continued to unfold with breathtaking tension. Ethan had slowed his approach, now just 15 feet away from Lily and the bear. He moved with extreme caution, afraid that any sudden movement might trigger the animal's defensive instincts. But what he was witnessing seemed to defy all natural laws. Lily was now sitting on the wet pavement beside the massive creature, one small hand stroking the bear's ear with the same gentle motion Rebecca used when comforting her during stormy nights. And the bear, the wild, injured, pregnant bear, lay perfectly still, her eyes half closed, seemingly accepting the child's touch. "It's okay," Lily said in her limited toddler vocabulary, the words barely audible to Ethan. "Okay." She repeated the phrase her parents used to comfort her, over and over. as if she understood exactly what the suffering animal needed to hear. The bear's labored breathing continued, but something had changed. There was a calmness to the animal now, a surrender to whatever fate awaited her. Ethan could hear commotion from the Morgan house now, the panicked voices of parents discovering their child missing. He couldn't take his eyes off the scene before him, afraid to call out and break whatever mysterious spell had been cast between child and beast. Instead, he slowly raised his phone and with trembling fingers captured a picture of something he knew no one would ever believe without evidence. The flash of his phone caught Lily's attention. She looked up at Ethan, her innocent face showing no fear, only a strange determination that seemed impossible for one so young. "Bear hurt," she said simply, pointing to the animal's distended belly. "Help." At that moment, Thomas burst through the front door of the house, Rebecca close behind him. When they saw their daughter sitting beside the massive predator, Rebecca's scream pierced the night. Thomas lunged forward instinctively, but Jacob Bennett was suddenly there, his strong hand gripping Thomas's arm. "Wait," the old ranger said firmly. "Don't make any sudden moves. Look." Thomas and Rebecca stood frozen, their faces masks of terror and disbelief as they took in the impossible scene. Their baby girl, their precious Lily, was calmly stroking one of the most dangerous predators in North America, as if it were a pet dog. "What's happening?" Rebecca whispered, her voice breaking. "Why isn't it attacking her?" Jacob shook his head slowly, his weathered face showing wonder. "I've never seen anything like it. It's as if they understand each other." By now, several neighbors had gathered, keeping a safe distance but unable to tear their eyes away from the extraordinary tableau. Someone had called animal control, and in the distance, sirens could be heard approaching. But everyone present knew they were witnessing something that transcended ordinary human-animal encounters. "The bear is pregnant," Ethan explained quietly, his paramedic training allowing him to assess the situation with clinical detachment despite his racing heart. "And in distress. She may be in labor or suffering complications." As if confirming his words, the bear suddenly let out a low moan, her massive body tensing visibly. Lily responded immediately, placing both her small hands on the animal's face and leaning close to make eye contact. "It's okay," she said again, with such conviction that several of the watching adults felt tears spring to their eyes. In that moment, something shifted in the atmosphere. The rain, which had been falling steadily, suddenly stopped. The clouds parted, allowing moonlight to bathe the scene in an almost theatrical glow, and the bear, her eyes fixed on the tiny human beside her, seemed to make a decision. With what appeared to be the last of her strength, the massive animal shifted her body, rolling slightly to reveal her swollen belly more fully in what looked almost like a gesture of trust. A collective gasp rose from the gathered onlookers. What they were witnessing defied everything they thought they knew about wild animals, especially one as potentially dangerous as a black bear. "She's showing her vulnerability," Jacob whispered, his decades of ranger experience failing to explain the behavior he was seeing. "It's like she's asking for help." Savannah Reed, the local veterinarian who lived 3 doors down, had joined the growing crowd. Still wearing her pajamas with a hastily thrown-on raincoat, she assessed the situation with professional calm that belied her racing heart. "That bear is definitely in labor," she said quietly to Ethan. "And something's wrong. See how she's positioned? The cubs might be stuck." Ethan nodded, his paramedic training allowing him to recognize the signs of distress, even in a species he wasn't familiar with treating. "Can you help her?" Savannah's face was grave. "I've never treated a wild bear before. This should be a job for wildlife services, but... She glanced at Lily, still calmly stroking the bear's head as if they shared some secret language. I don't think we have time to wait. The approaching sirens grew louder, but everyone present understood that standard protocol for a situation like this would likely end with the bear being euthanized, a mother and her unborn cubs lost. Thomas and Rebecca stood paralyzed, torn between their desperate need to snatch their daughter to safety and the extraordinary scene unfolding before them. The bear showed no signs of aggression toward Lily, quite the opposite. The massive creature seemed to draw comfort from the child's presence. "I need to get to my clinic," Savannah said suddenly. Decision made. "I have equipment there, sedatives, surgical supplies. If we can stabilize her, maybe—" "I'll drive you," offered Connor Adams, another neighbor who had joined the growing crowd. "My truck's right there." As they rushed to get the supplies, Thomas inched closer to his daughter, moving with exquisite slowness. "Lily," he called softly. "Lily, honey, come to Daddy." But Lily, normally so obedient, didn't even look up. Her entire focus remained on the suffering animal beside her. "Bear's sick," she said with absolute conviction. "Lily, help." Rebecca's hand covered her mouth, tears streaming down her face. "How does she know?" she whispered. "She's just a baby herself." Jacob Bennett, who had remained calm throughout the extraordinary encounter, suddenly noticed something he had missed before. Around the bear's neck, barely visible beneath the matted fur, was what appeared to be a thin collar. "Wait," he said, stepping carefully closer. "This isn't just any bear. I think this might be Aurora." The name sent a ripple of recognition through several of the longtime Pinewood residents. Aurora was something of a local legend. A black bear that had been rescued as a cub 5 years earlier, raised in a wildlife rehabilitation center until she was old enough to be released back into the wild with a tracking collar. The story had made regional news, with the rehabilitated bear becoming a symbol of successful conservation efforts. "Are you sure?" Thomas asked, momentarily distracted from his fear for Lily. Jacob nodded slowly. "The wildlife center's about 20 miles north of here. This could be her. They would have records, maybe even a vet who's treated her before." Ethan was already on his phone, searching for the contact information for the wildlife center. "It's closed at this hour, but there has to be an emergency number." The surreal scene continued as Lily began to sing softly to the bear, a simple, wordless melody that Rebecca recognized as the lullaby she sang to her daughter every night. The toddler's small hand never stopped its gentle stroking of the animal's massive head. A patrol car from the Pinewood Police Department pulled up, followed closely by an animal control van. Officer Michael Hayes stepped out, his hand instinctively moving to his sidearm when he saw the bear. His eyes widened in disbelief when he noticed the small child sitting beside the massive predator. "Nobody move," he ordered, his voice tense. "We need to get that child away from—" "Wait," Jacob interrupted, stepping forward with his hands raised. "This is a special situation, Michael. That bear is in labor, and she's not showing any aggression. In fact, she seems to be responding to the child." Officer Hayes looked skeptical, but before he could respond, Savannah and Connor returned, the truck screeching to a halt behind the patrol car. Savannah jumped out, carrying a large medical bag. "I brought sedatives," she explained breathlessly. "Enough to safely immobilize her while I examine her. But we need to be careful. If she's as far along in labor as I think, sedating her completely could harm the cubs." The animal control officer, Haley Dawson, had emerged from her van. Unlike Officer Hayes, she approached the scene with cautious wonder rather than alarm. "I've never seen anything like this," she admitted. "In any other circumstance, we'd clear the area and tranquilize her immediately, but Her voice trailed off as she watched Lily lean forward and press her forehead gently against the bear's nose in a gesture of such trust that several onlookers gasped. That child shouldn't be anywhere near a wild animal, Officer Hayes insisted, but his words lacked conviction as he witnessed the extraordinary connection between toddler and bear. Just then, Ethan's phone rang. He had managed to reach someone from the Wildlife Rehabilitation Center. After a brief, urgent conversation, his face lit up with hope. "It's Dr. Logan Carter from the Wildlife Center," he announced to the group. "He confirms they released a female bear named Aurora with a tracking collar 5 years ago. He says if it's her, she might be habituated enough to humans to explain some of her behavior. He's on his way with specialized equipment, but it'll take him at least 30 minutes to get here." Savannah shook her head. "I don't think we have 30 minutes. Look." The bear had begun to pant more heavily, her massive body shuddering with what were unmistakably contractions. Lily, showing an intuition that seemed impossible for a child not yet 2 years old, had moved to stroke the bear's belly with gentle, soothing motions. "Better," she said confidently. "Better soon." Rebecca couldn't contain herself any longer. Moving with slow, deliberate steps, she approached her daughter, fighting every maternal instinct that screamed at her to snatch Lily away from danger. "Lily," she whispered, crouching down a few feet away. "Mommy's here." For the first time, Lily looked up, her innocent face serene and unafraid. "Mommy, help Bear," she said simply, as if this were the most natural request in the world. Rebecca froze, caught between terror and something else, a strange sense that she was witnessing something profound that transcended ordinary understanding. She looked into the bear's eyes and saw not a wild, dangerous animal, but a fellow mother in desperate need. In that moment, something shifted within her. Her nursing training, set aside years ago when Lily was born, suddenly resurfaced with clarity. She had assisted with difficult deliveries during her hospital rotations. This was different. Wildly, impossibly different. But the principles of birth remained the same across species. "Savannah," she said, her voice steady now. "I was a labor and delivery nurse before Lily was born. Tell me what you need me to do." Thomas stared at his wife in disbelief. "Rebecca, you can't be serious. This is a wild bear. This is a mother who needs help," Rebecca interrupted, a strange calmness settling over her. "And our daughter somehow knew it before any of us." The gathered crowd watched in stunned silence as Rebecca joined her daughter beside the massive bear. Aurora, if it was indeed her, regarded the woman with the same acceptance she had shown the child. It was as if some unspoken understanding had passed between all three of them, transcending species and language. Savannah approached cautiously with her medical bag. "I'll administer a mild sedative first. Just enough to keep her calm, but not enough to endanger the cubs." As the veterinarian prepared the injection, Lily suddenly looked up at the night sky. Following her gaze, the onlookers were startled to see that the clouds had completely cleared, revealing a spectacular display of stars and a full moon that bathed the extraordinary scene in silver light. "Look," Jacob whispered, pointing upward. "The aurora borealis." Indeed, shimmering curtains of green and purple light had begun to dance across the northern sky, an extremely rare occurrence this far south. The timing seemed too perfect to be coincidence, adding yet another layer of magic to the already surreal night. As the northern lights rippled overhead, Savannah carefully administered the sedative. The bear accepted the needle without resistance, her trusting eyes never leaving Lily's face. Within minutes, her breathing became more regular, though the contractions continued. "I can feel a cub," Savannah announced, her hands gently palpating the bear's abdomen. It's in position, but she's too exhausted to push effectively. Rebecca moved closer, her nursing instincts taking over. We need to help her. In human births, sometimes we apply gentle pressure to help guide the baby through the birth canal. Savannah nodded, grateful for the assistance. Yes, but we'll need to be extremely careful. Bear cubs are much smaller relative to the mother than human babies, but the principle should be similar. Together, the veterinarian and the former nurse began to work in tandem, their hands guiding and supporting as Aurora continued to labor. Lily remained by the bear's head, still stroking and singing her wordless lullaby, seemingly unbothered by the tension around her. The gathered crowd had grown larger, with nearly the entire neighborhood now watching from a respectful distance. Phones were out, recording the unprecedented event, but for once, social media sharing seemed secondary to being present for something truly remarkable. Officer Hayes had holstered his weapon and now stood with Jacob, both men watching with expressions of wonder. The animal control officer, Haley, had brought blankets from her van and was ready to receive the cubs if the impromptu delivery was successful. "I can see it," Savannah suddenly exclaimed. "There's the first cub." A collective holding of breath swept through the crowd as a tiny, wet form emerged into the world. A bear cub, no larger than a kitten, its eyes tightly closed, its miniature paws curled against its body. Savannah quickly cleared its airways, rubbing it vigorously with a clean towel to stimulate breathing. After a tense moment, the tiny creature let out a squeak that brought tears to many eyes. "It's a girl," Savannah announced, her professional demeanor briefly cracking with emotion. She placed the cub near Aurora's head, where the mother bear gently nuzzled her offspring despite her exhaustion. Lily clapped her hands in delight. "Baby bear," she exclaimed, "more coming." As if on cue, Aurora's body tensed with another contraction. Rebecca and Savannah returned to their positions, working together with newfound confidence. "There's the second one," Rebecca said, her voice catching as another tiny form began to emerge. The second delivery went more smoothly than the first, bringing another healthy female cub into the world under the dancing northern lights. Haley received this one, cleaning it carefully before placing it alongside its sibling. "Two healthy cubs," Savannah confirmed, checking them both quickly. "But I think there's at least one more." Aurora was weakening visibly now, her massive body trembling with exhaustion. The sedative had worn off enough that she was fully aware, but her strength was failing. The third contraction seemed weaker, less productive. "She doesn't have the strength to push," Savannah said, worry creeping into her voice. "If we can't help her deliver the last cub soon—" She didn't need to finish the thought. Everyone understood the stakes, not just for the unborn cub, but for Aurora as well. Lily, who had been watching the births with fascination, suddenly moved from her position by Aurora's head. Before anyone could stop her, she placed both her small hands on the bear's belly and leaned close, as if listening. "Come out, baby bear," she said with startling clarity. "Mommy waiting." And then, to the amazement of everyone present, she began to push gently on Aurora's abdomen, mimicking exactly the technique she had seen Rebecca and Savannah using. Her tiny hands could apply only the slightest pressure, but something about her touch seemed to rouse Aurora's failing strength. With a final, massive effort, the mother bear pushed, and the third cub, noticeably smaller than its siblings, slipped into the world. But unlike the first two, this cub didn't move. Its tiny form lay still and silent in Savannah's hands. "It's not breathing," the veterinarian said quietly, already working to clear the airways and stimulate the tiny body. "Come on, little one. A hush fell over the crowd. Even the night itself seemed to hold its breath. Aurora raised her head weakly, her eyes fixed on her motionless cub with unmistakable concern. And then Lily did something that no one could have anticipated. She reached out and took the unresponsive cub from Savannah's hands, cradling it against her chest the way she held her favorite teddy bear. With one small finger, she gently stroked its tiny head. "Wake up," she whispered. "Wake up, baby bear." Rebecca moved to intervene, but something stopped her. The same intuition that had guided this entire impossible night. Instead, she watched as her daughter held the lifeless cub, rocking it gently as if it were a doll. Then, Lily leaned down and pressed her lips to the cub's head in a tender kiss. In that moment, the northern lights pulsed with sudden brilliance, bathing the scene in otherworldly color. And beneath Lily's gentle touch, the tiny cub shuddered once, twice, and then let out a weak but unmistakable cry. Gasps and exclamations erupted from the watching crowd. Even Officer Hayes, who had remained skeptical throughout, found himself blinking back tears at what could only be described as a miracle. "It's alive," Savannah confirmed, her professional composure completely abandoned now. "I don't believe it, but it's alive." Lily beamed with pride as she carefully returned the revived cub to its mother. Aurora gently nuzzled all three of her offspring, her eyes now peaceful despite her exhaustion. In the distance, sirens announced the arrival of Dr. Carter from the Wildlife Center. But the crisis had passed. Under the shimmering curtain of the northern lights, a human toddler had somehow bridged the divide between species, bringing comfort to a mother in distress and helping to usher 3 new lives into the world. Thomas finally approached, crouching beside his wife and daughter. "Lily," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "how did you know the bear needed help?" Lily looked up at her father, her innocent face showing surprise at the question. "Bear, Mommy," she said simply, patting her own chest. "Lily, no." Rebecca gathered her daughter into her arms at last, tears flowing freely down her face. "Yes, sweetheart, you knew. Somehow, you knew." As Dr. Carter arrived with his team and preparations began to safely transport Aurora and her cubs to the Wildlife Center for monitoring, the residents of Pinewood stood together under the dancing lights of the Aurora Borealis, forever changed by what they had witnessed. A child, too young to understand danger, had demonstrated a connection to nature that most adults had forgotten was possible. A mother's distress had been recognized by another mother's child. And in that recognition, something magical had happened. A moment of pure compassion that transcended language, species, and the artificial boundaries humans had constructed between themselves and the wild world. In the days that followed, the story would spread far beyond Pinewood. News crews would arrive, experts would debate, and scientists would seek rational explanations for Lily's extraordinary behavior and Aurora's unprecedented trust. Social media would explode with the videos captured by neighbors, generating millions of views and countless emotional comments. But for those who had been present that night, no explanation was necessary. They had witnessed something that went beyond science and logic, a pure connection between a human child and a wild mother that reminded them all of a simpler truth, that compassion needs no language, and that kindness can bridge even the widest divides. 1 month later, Aurora and her 3 healthy cubs were released back into a protected area of the forest, their tracking collars allowing researchers to monitor their progress. And on quiet evenings, Rebecca would often find Lily standing at her bedroom window, gazing toward the distant mountains where the bears now roamed. "Bear babies okay?" Lily would ask. "Yes, sweetheart," Rebecca would answer, holding her miraculous daughter close. "Thanks to you, they're all okay. And sometimes, if the night was clear and the stars were bright, they would see a flicker of green and purple in the northern sky, a reminder of the night when a baby's compassion had changed everything, leaving not a dry eye in Pinewood. 5 years later. The morning sun filtered through the tall pines surrounding the Morgan family's new home at the edge of Pinewood Forest. The modest cabin, built with sustainably harvested local timber, blended into the landscape as if it had always been part of these ancient woods. A hand-crafted sign hung beside the front door, Harmony Haven, where all creatures are welcome. Lily Morgan, now a precocious 7-year-old with the same golden curls but much longer legs, sat cross-legged on the wide wooden porch. Her sketchbook was open on her lap. Colored pencils scattered around her as she carefully drew the deer that grazed fearlessly at the forest's edge. The young doe had been visiting every morning for weeks, somehow knowing she was safe here. "That's beautiful, sweetheart," Rebecca said, stepping out onto the porch with 2 steaming mugs. She handed one filled with hot chocolate to her daughter and kept the coffee for herself. "You've really captured her eyes." Lily smiled up at her mother. "She told me she likes the salt block Dad put out." Rebecca no longer questioned these statements. In the years since that miraculous night with Aurora, the Morgan family had come to accept that their daughter possessed a unique connection to animals that defied conventional explanation. Scientists had studied her, skeptics had challenged her, and media had sensationalized her. But Lily remained remarkably unchanged. A bright, compassionate child who simply understood animals in a way others couldn't. "Is Dad still on the phone with Dr. Carter?" Lily asked, taking a careful sip of her hot chocolate. Rebecca nodded. "They're finalizing plans for tomorrow's release." She sat down beside her daughter, gazing out at the forest that had become their home. "Are you excited?" "And nervous," Lily admitted. "What if they don't remember me?" Thomas Morgan emerged from the cabin, tucking his phone into his pocket. 5 years had added a few strands of gray to his temples, but also a depth of purpose to his eyes that hadn't been there before. After the night with Aurora, he had left his corporate job and, together with Rebecca, established the Pinewood Wildlife Coexistence Initiative, a nonprofit dedicated to finding innovative ways for humans and wildlife to share habitat peacefully. "Of course they'll remember you, kiddo," he said, ruffling Lily's hair. "Aurora certainly did, even after all this time." The reunion with Aurora had happened just 3 months earlier, an encounter that had once again defied everything wildlife experts thought they knew about bear behavior. The mother bear, now older and grayer around the muzzle, had emerged from the forest behind their cabin one evening while Lily was reading on the porch. Rebecca had frozen in terror, but Lily had simply marked her page, set down her book, and walked to the edge of the porch. "Hello, Aurora," she had said, as casually as if greeting an old friend. "I've missed you." The bear had woofed softly, approaching without aggression until she stood just feet from the child who had once helped deliver her cubs. For several breathtaking minutes, they had simply regarded each other in peaceful silence before Aurora turned and disappeared back into the forest. Dr. Logan Carter, who had installed a wildlife camera near their cabin after hearing about possible bear activity, had captured the entire encounter. The footage had reignited worldwide interest in Lily Morgan and her extraordinary gift. "The transport team will be here at dawn," Thomas said, bringing Rebecca and Lily back to the present moment. "Doctor, Carter says all 3 juveniles are ready. The rehabilitation has been completely successful." Lily set aside her sketchbook, her expression suddenly serious beyond her years. "Do you think the people who hurt them will try again?" Thomas and Rebecca exchanged a glance. They had tried to shield Lily from the uglier realities of human-wildlife conflict, but their daughter's connection to animals made her acutely sensitive to their suffering. The 3 bear cubs they would be releasing tomorrow weren't Aurora's offspring. They were the victims of a poaching attempt that had left their mother dead 3 months earlier. The poachers had intended to sell the cubs to an overseas collector of exotic animals, but an anonymous tip had led authorities to rescue the traumatized young bears before they could be transported. "The people who hurt them are in jail," Thomas assured her, sitting down on her other side. "And thanks to the new laws that were passed because of you and Aurora, the penalties for wildlife trafficking are much steeper now." The Aurora Protections, as they had come to be known, had started as local ordinances in Pinewood before spreading to state-level legislation. Now, there was serious talk of federal adoption of similar wildlife protection measures, all because of one extraordinary night that had been captured on dozens of cell phones and shared millions of times across the globe. "I just want them to be safe," Lily said quietly. "I know, sweetheart," Rebecca replied, wrapping an arm around her daughter's shoulders. "That's why we do what we do." The Morgan family's transformation had been as remarkable as the event that triggered it. Rebecca had returned to school for a degree in wildlife biology, while Thomas had leveraged his business background to secure funding and partnerships for their initiative. Together with Dr. Carter and the Wildlife Rehabilitation Center, they had created a model program for human-wildlife coexistence that was being studied and replicated in communities around the world. "Did you finish packing for the camping trip?" Thomas asked, changing the subject to something more cheerful. Lily's face lit up with excitement. "Almost. I just need to decide which books to bring." The annual father-daughter camping trip had become a tradition, one that Lily looked forward to all year. 3 days in the heart of the forest, observing wildlife, learning survival skills, and spending precious time together away from the demands of their increasingly public lives. "We should head into town soon," Rebecca reminded them. "The ceremony starts at noon." Today marked the 5th anniversary of the night that had changed everything, and Pinewood had organized a celebration. The small town had gained a measure of fame from what the media had dubbed the Miracle of Pinewood, and the annual commemoration had grown from a simple community gathering to an event that drew visitors from across the country. As they prepared to leave, Lily suddenly stopped at the edge of the porch, her head tilted as if listening to something only she could hear. "What is it, honey?" Rebecca asked, recognizing the familiar gesture. "Someone's coming," Lily said. "Someone important." Thomas and Rebecca had learned to trust their daughter's instincts. They followed her gaze toward the forest path that connected their cabin to the main road. At first, they saw nothing. Then, a figure emerged from between the trees, an elderly man leaning heavily on a carved wooden walking stick, his weathered face partially obscured by a gray beard. "Mr. Bennett," Lily exclaimed, racing down the porch steps to greet the former forest ranger. Jacob Bennett had moved away from Pinewood 3 years earlier, following the death of his wife. His departure had been sudden, with only a brief note left for the Morgans explaining that he needed a change of scenery to process his grief. No one had heard from him since. "Little Lily," the old ranger said, his voice rougher than they remembered but filled with warmth as he accepted her hug. "Not so little anymore, I see." Thomas and Rebecca hurried down to greet their old friend, questions bubbling up but temporarily set aside in the joy of reunion. "Jacob," Thomas said, clasping the older man's hand. "This is a surprise." "Couldn't miss the anniversary," Jacob replied, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "And I have news that couldn't wait." Rebecca ushered everyone back to the porch, quickly bringing out lemonade and the homemade cookies she'd baked for the celebration. As they settled into the comfortable chairs, Jacob's expression grew serious. "I've been in the Northeastern Territories," he said, "working with indigenous communities there on their wildlife management programs, but that's not why I came back." He reached into his worn backpack and pulled out a tablet. After a few taps, he handed it to Thomas. On the screen was a news article with a headline that made Thomas's eyes widen. "Mysterious Animal Communicator Reported in Remote Canadian Community." "Read it," Jacob urged. Thomas cleared his throat and began to read aloud. "The indigenous community of Pine Hollow reports extraordinary incidents involving a teenage girl who appears to have an unusual connection with local wildlife. 17-year-old Jessica Brooks, who was adopted by community members as an infant, has been documented communicating with and influencing the behavior of wolves, moose, and most recently, a young orca that had become stranded in a nearby inlet." Rebecca's hand flew to her mouth. "Another one? Like Lily?" Jacob nodded, his eyes bright with excitement. "I saw her myself. The similarities are uncanny. The animals respond to her just like they do to Lily. And there's more." He pointed at the tablet. "Keep reading." Thomas scrolled down to continue. "Community elders believe Brooks' abilities are connected to an ancient legend about forest speakers, children born with the gift to bridge the gap between humans and the natural world. According to oral traditions, these rare individuals appear during times of great environmental crisis to remind humanity of its connection to all living things." "Forest speakers?" Lily repeated, the words seeming to resonate with something deep inside her. "There are others like me?" Jacob smiled gently at her. "The elders believe there have always been children like you, Lily. Rare, special, appearing when they're most needed. They just weren't always recognized for what they were." Thomas looked skeptical. "And you believe this legend? After what I witnessed with Lily and Aurora?" Jacob raised an eyebrow. "I keep an open mind these days. But there's something else you should know." He reached for the tablet and swiped to another article. This was published just last week. The headline read, "Child in Mumbai Saves Trapped Elephant with Unusual Communication Method." "And another in Kenya," Jacob continued, swiping again. "A boy who led rangers to a group of injured rhinos after what he described as hearing their pain. And a girl in Australia who's been documented swimming safely among normally aggressive sharks." Rebecca's scientific mind struggled to process the implications. "Are you suggesting these are all forest speakers?" "I'm suggesting," Jacob said carefully, "that your daughter isn't alone, and that perhaps her gift is part of something larger than we've understood. The elders at Pine Hollow believe these children are appearing now because the natural world is in crisis, because the disconnect between humans and nature has never been greater." Lily had been unusually quiet during this exchange, her young face thoughtful, as she absorbed the idea that there were others who shared her unique connection to animals. "I want to meet them," she said suddenly. "All of them." Thomas and Rebecca exchanged concerned glances. Their protective instincts warred with the knowledge that their daughter's gift was meant to be shared somehow. "That might be complicated, sweetheart," Thomas began. "But necessary," Jacob interrupted. "The elders believe these children need to find each other, that together their impact could be far greater than apart. You're talking about children from all over the world," Rebecca pointed out. "Some of them in remote areas, different cultures, different languages." "Yes," Jacob acknowledged, "but they share a language more fundamental than words." He looked meaningfully at Lily. "The same language that allowed a toddler to understand a bear's distress when no adult could." A contemplative silence fell over the porch. The implications of Jacob's revelation were enormous, not just for Lily and their family, but potentially for the relationship between humans and the natural world that the Morgans had been working to heal through their initiative. After a long moment, it was Lily who broke the silence. "The bears we're releasing tomorrow," she said thoughtfully. "They told me something I didn't understand until now." "What's that, honey?" Rebecca asked. "They said they weren't the only ones who needed to find their way home." Lily's eyes, wise beyond her years, met Jacob's. "I think they meant the other forest speakers." Thomas ran a hand through his hair, a gesture that had become familiar whenever he was processing something that challenged his worldview. "So, what are you suggesting, Jacob?" "That we try to find all these children and bring them together somehow." "I'm suggesting," the old ranger replied, "that they might already be finding their way to each other. Jessica Brooks had a dream about Lily 3 months ago. That's why I came back. Because Jessica described this cabin, this forest, and Lily herself with perfect accuracy, having never seen any of them." Rebecca shivered despite the warm morning sun. "That's impossible," Jacob finished with a small smile. "Like a toddler helping deliver bear cubs, like a mother bear trusting a human child with her newborns, I think we left impossible behind a long time ago." The sound of a vehicle approaching drew their attention. A wildlife center van was making its way up the long driveway, Doctor. Carter, visible behind the wheel. "He's early," Thomas remarked, checking his watch. "No," Jacob said, his voice suddenly urgent. "Something's wrong." He stood, leaning on his walking stick as he peered down the driveway. "Look at his face." As the van pulled up, they could see the tension in Dr. Carter's expression. He parked hurriedly and jumped out, not bothering to close the door behind him. "Thomas, Rebecca," he called as he jogged toward the porch. "Thank God you're home. We have a situation." "The cubs?" Rebecca asked immediately. Dr. Carter shook his head. "They're fine. It's Aurora. She's missing." Lily stepped forward, her young face suddenly pale. "What do you mean, missing?" "The tracking collar sent out a distress signal last night," Dr. Carter explained. "We dispatched a team to her last known location, but when they got there, they found only the collar, deliberately cut off and left on the ground." "Poachers?" Thomas said grimly. Dr. Carter nodded. "We think so. There have been reports of a new trafficking ring operating in the area, targeting bears specifically. The Forest Service found tire tracks nearby, consistent with the type of heavy-duty vehicles these operations typically use." "But why Aurora?" Rebecca questioned. "She's older, not as valuable as younger bears would be." "Because she's famous," Jacob said quietly. "The bear that was saved by a child, that gave birth with human help. In certain markets, an animal with that kind of story would be priceless." Lily had gone very still. In the way that her parents had learned meant she was sensing something beyond human perception. "She's scared," she whispered, "and she's not alone." All eyes turned to the child. "What do you mean, not alone?" Dr. Carter asked. "There are other bears," Lily said, her eyes unfocused as if seeing something far away. "In metal cages, dark, moving, they're on a truck." Thomas knelt before his daughter, taking her small hands in his. "Lily, can you tell where they are?" The child closed her eyes, concentrating hard. "Water," she said after a moment. "I can smell water, salt water." Jacob and Dr. Carter exchanged alarmed glances. "The port," Dr. Carter said. "If they're heading for international waters, we need to call Officer Hayes," Thomas said, already reaching for his phone. "And the Coast Guard." "Wait," Jacob held up a hand. "If Lily can sense Aurora, maybe she can help us find her more precisely. The port is huge. They could be anywhere." Rebecca looked torn. The thought of involving her daughter in a potentially dangerous operation against animal traffickers went against every protective instinct she possessed. But Aurora was special to all of them, and the thought of the gentle bear being shipped overseas to spend her remaining years in captivity was unbearable. "I can find her," Lily said with quiet determination. "I promised her cubs would be safe. I need to help her too." In that moment, Rebecca saw not just her little girl, but a glimpse of the remarkable person Lily was becoming, someone whose unique gift carried with it both privilege and responsibility. "Okay," she said, making the difficult decision. "But we do this carefully, with law enforcement involved every step of the way." Within the hour, an extraordinary operation was underway. Officer Hayes, now the chief of Pinewood's expanded police department, coordinated with state police and federal wildlife agents. The Morgan family, along with Jacob and Dr. Carter, followed Lily's guidance in a police vehicle, heading toward the coastal port 70 miles from Pinewood. As they drove, Jacob shared more of what he had learned during his time with the indigenous community in Canada. The concept of forest speakers wasn't limited to a single culture. Similar legends existed in traditional stories around the world. Children with special connections to animals appeared in African folklore, Asian mythologies, and European fairy tales alike. The common thread, Jacob explained, is that these children appear during times when the balance between humans and nature has been dangerously disrupted. They serve as bridges, helping humans remember their connection to the natural world. "But why Lily?" Thomas asked, glancing at his daughter who sat quietly between them in the back seat. Her eyes closed as she concentrated on maintaining her connection to Aurora. "Why our family?" Jacob shrugged. "The elders would say it's because she chose you, that forest speakers select their families carefully, seeking those who will protect them while allowing their gifts to flourish." Rebecca thought about their life before that night with Aurora. Thomas's corporate job, her abandoned nursing career, their comfortable suburban existence. How different things might have been without Lily's extraordinary gift pushing them toward a completely different path. "We're getting closer," Lily said suddenly, her eyes flying open. "Turn right at the next exit." Officer Hayes, who was driving, relayed the instruction to the other vehicles in their convoy. As they approached the sprawling port complex, Lily's directions became more specific, guiding them through a maze of warehouses and loading docks. "There," she said finally, pointing to a nondescript warehouse with a large truck parked at its loading bay. "She's in there. She's very afraid." Chief Hayes immediately called for backup, instructing everyone else to remain in the vehicles while his officers secured the perimeter. But as they watched, the warehouse door began to open, and men started loading large crates onto the truck. "They're moving the animals now," Dr. Carter said urgently. "If that truck leaves—" "I'm going in," Chief Hayes decided, checking his sidearm. "Dr. Carter, Jacob, stay with the family. Under no circumstances are any of you to leave this vehicle." As the police chief approached the warehouse with 2 officers, his badge clearly visible, the men loading the truck spotted him. Instead of complying with his orders to stop, they hurriedly slammed the truck's rear doors and rushed to the cab. "They're going to run," Thomas realized, watching in horror as the truck's engine roared to life. What happened next occurred so quickly that, later, no one could quite agree on the exact sequence of events. The truck lurched forward, forcing Chief Hayes and his officers to jump aside. As it accelerated toward the port exit, Lily suddenly threw open the car door and darted out. "Lily!" Rebecca screamed, lunging after her daughter but missing her by inches. The child ran directly into the path of the oncoming truck, her small figure illuminated in its headlights. The driver, faced with a child suddenly in his path, instinctively swerved. sending the heavy vehicle crashing into a stack of empty shipping containers with a deafening impact. Thomas was out of the car in an instant, racing toward his daughter who stood unharmed in the middle of the road, her expression eerily calm. Rebecca was right behind him, her heart pounding with terror at how close they had come to tragedy. "Lily Morgan," she gasped, gathering her daughter into a fierce embrace. "Don't you ever do something like that again." But Lily was already pulling away, pointing toward the crashed truck. "We need to help them," she insisted. "Now!" The impact had damaged the truck's rear doors, forcing them partially open. As police officers surrounded the vehicle and apprehended the dazed drivers, Thomas and Doctor, Carter cautiously approached the back of the truck. Inside were 6 large metal cages, each containing a distressed bear. "Aurora," Lily called, pushing forward despite her parents' attempts to hold her back. "I'm here." From the largest cage in the center of the truck, a familiar woof answered her call. Aurora, though sedated and confused, recognized the child who had once saved her cubs. What followed was organized chaos. Wildlife authorities arrived with transport and veterinary support. The 6 bears, Aurora, and 5 younger animals were carefully removed from the truck and transferred to proper wildlife transport vehicles. The traffickers were taken into custody, facing federal charges that would keep them imprisoned for years. And through it all, Lily Morgan remained by Aurora's side, her small hand resting on the sedated bear's head, whispering reassurances that only the animal could understand. As the sun began to set over the port, turning the western sky into a canvas of orange and purple, Dr. Carter approached the Morgans with news. "All 6 bears will recover," he reported. "Aurora is in stable condition. Once they've been examined and cleared medically, we can release them back into protected areas." Relief washed over the family, but it was tempered by the realization of how close they had come to losing Aurora forever, and by the terrifying moment when Lily had put herself in danger to save the bears. "We need to talk about what happened today," Thomas said seriously as they prepared to return home. "Running in front of that truck was incredibly dangerous, Lily. You could have been killed." Lily looked up at her father, her expression startlingly mature. "I knew they wouldn't hit me," she said simply. "I could feel the driver's heart. He wouldn't hurt a child." Rebecca and Thomas exchanged worried glances. Their daughter's gift, remarkable as it was, seemed to be giving her a sense of invulnerability that could prove dangerous as she grew older and faced more complex situations. Jacob, who had been speaking with the authorities, joined their conversation. "Your daughter's actions today saved those bears," he said quietly. "But I understand your concern. The elders speak of this too, the need for forest speakers to be guided by those who love them, to understand the limits of their gifts." "Which brings us back to these other children," Thomas said. "If what you've told us is true, they may be facing similar challenges." Jacob nodded. "The legends say that when forest speakers find each other, their understanding of their gifts grows. They learn from each other in ways that even the most loving parents can't teach them." As they drove back to Pinewood in the gathering dusk, plans were already forming. The extraordinary events at the port would make headlines around the world, further elevating Lily's profile and potentially drawing attention from the other forest speakers Jacob had identified. "What if we hosted a gathering?" Rebecca suggested as they neared home. "Here in Pinewood, a safe place where these children and their families could meet, share experiences, learn from each other." "A summit of forest speakers," Jacob mused. "The elders would say it's about time." Lily, who had been nearly asleep against her mother's shoulder, stirred at this. "They're already coming," she murmured. "I can feel them, like stars moving closer together in the sky." Thomas might once have dismissed such a statement as childish imagination, but 5 years of witnessing his daughter's extraordinary abilities had taught him to listen when she spoke this way. "Then we'll be ready for them," he said, reaching back to squeeze her hand. As they turned onto the forest road that led to their cabin, a spectacular light display filled the northern sky, vivid curtains of green and purple dancing among the stars. The aurora borealis had returned to Pinewood, just as it had on that miraculous night 5 years earlier. "Look," Lily whispered, fully awake now and gazing in wonder at the celestial light show. "They're celebrating." "Who is, sweetheart?" Rebecca asked. Lily smiled, her innocent face illuminated by the ethereal lights above. "All of them, the bears, the wolves, the eagles, they know something important is happening, that people are starting to remember how to listen." The northern lights rippled across the sky as if in confirmation of the child's words, and somewhere in the forest surrounding their home, a chorus of animal sounds rose in what almost seemed like harmony. The distant howl of wolves, the call of nightbirds, the rustle of creatures large and small, acknowledging something magical in their midst. The story of Lily Morgan and Aurora had already changed countless lives, and inspired a movement to protect the delicate balance between humans and wildlife. But as the Morgan family watched the lights dance overhead, they understood that it was only the beginning of a much larger story, one that would bring together children from across the globe, each with a unique connection to the natural world, each a bridge between humanity and the countless species with whom they shared the planet. "Tomorrow," Thomas said, drawing his family close as they stood beneath the shimmering sky, "we begin a new chapter." In her dreams that night, Lily flew above the earth, soaring over oceans and continents. Below her, pinpoints of light glowed like beacons: Jessica in Canada, the boy in Kenya, the girl in Australia, and others she had yet to meet. Each light pulsed in rhythm with her own heartbeat, a constellation of forest speakers awakening to their shared purpose. And in the depths of Pinewood Forest, where Aurora and her grown cubs would soon roam free once more, the animals stirred with ancient knowledge. The time of remembering had begun. 1 year later, the amphitheater built in the heart of Pinewood Forest was unlike any structure ever created. Designed with input from wildlife biologists, indigenous elders, and the forest speakers themselves, it formed a perfect circle with no barriers between the gathered humans and the surrounding wilderness. The seats were crafted from fallen trees, the stage from natural stone. Above, the open sky allowed sunlight to filter through the canopy of ancient pines. Today, those seats were filled with an extraordinary gathering: families from 6 continents, government officials, indigenous leaders, and wildlife experts. At the center of the stage stood 8 children, ranging in age from 5 to 17, each with the same uncommon light in their eyes that Lily Morgan had carried since infancy. The first global summit of forest speakers had drawn attention from around the world. Media had been permitted to record only the opening ceremony before being asked to leave, allowing what followed to unfold in privacy and trust. Now, as the summer sun began its descent toward the horizon, the summit was drawing to a close with a ceremony that few present would ever forget. Lily, now 8 years old, stepped forward. Though no longer the youngest of the forest speakers, that honor belonged to 5-year-old Ming from a remote village in China. She had been unanimously chosen to deliver the closing words. "We came here as strangers," she began, her clear voice carrying easily through the natural acoustics of the amphitheater. "But we leave as family. What we have learned from each other these past 7 days has changed us forever." Rebecca and Thomas sat in the front row, hands clasped tightly together, still amazed by the transformation of their once shy daughter into this poised young leader. Beside them, Jacob Bennett's weathered face shone with quiet pride. His journey to find the other forest speakers had taken him to the furthest corners of the earth, but seeing them all together now made every hardship worthwhile. Jessica Brooks from Canada, the tall teenager who could calm rampaging wolves with a whispered word. Amare from Kenya, who had led rangers to poachers by following the grief songs of elephants. Ming from China, who had walked unharmed among giant pandas that allowed no other human near. Mateo from Brazil, who could predict natural disasters by interpreting the behavior of rainforest creatures. Kaya from Australia, who swam with sharks as if they were puppies. Sophia from Russia, whose connection with Siberian tigers had saved an entire breeding population. And James from Scotland, whose affinity with sea life had revealed migration patterns never before documented. Together with Lily, they formed a circle now, joining hands as she continued. We have different languages, different cultures, different stories, but we share one truth, that humans were never meant to be separate from the natural world. Somewhere along the way, people forgot how to listen to the voices of those who share this planet with us. A gentle breeze stirred through the amphitheater, carrying with it the scents of pine and earth. At the edges of the clearing, shadows moved, animals drawn to the gathering, keeping a respectful distance but undeniably present. Those with keen eyes could spot deer, foxes, and even the occasional wolf watching from between the trees. "Our gift isn't magic," Lily said, her voice growing stronger. "It's remembering what others have forgotten. Every person has this ability sleeping inside them, the capacity to understand that we are part of nature, not separate from it." From overhead came the cry of eagles circling in the evening sky. Many in the audience found themselves blinking back tears, moved by a ceremony that seemed to bridge worlds long divided. "Today we make a promise," Lily continued, as the other forest speakers formed a tighter circle around her. "We will be teachers as well as students. We will help others remember their connection to all living things, and we will protect those who cannot speak in words humans understand." At the back of the amphitheater, a murmur rippled through the crowd. People turned in their seats, gasps of wonder and alarm rising as a massive form emerged from the forest. Aurora, now in the twilight of her years, her muzzle silver and her gait slower than in her prime, walked deliberately down the central aisle. Wildlife officials half rose from their seats, instinctively concerned about the proximity of a wild bear to so many people. But Jacob held up a calming hand, and they reluctantly subsided. No one who witnessed what happened next would ever be the same. Aurora continued her stately procession until she reached the edge of the stage. There, she stopped and sat on her haunches, her intelligent eyes fixed on Lily. The bear that had once collapsed beside a garbage can in desperation, that had given birth with human help, that had been rescued from traffickers, now returned of her own accord to complete a circle begun 7 years earlier. Lily stepped forward without hesitation, breaking the circle of children to kneel before the massive creature. She placed one small hand on Aurora's head in a gesture of such trust and tenderness that many in the audience had to look away, overcome with emotion. 7 years ago, Lily said, her voice carrying clearly despite her focus on the bear before her. A baby who didn't know any better helped a mother who had nowhere else to turn. They didn't speak the same language. They weren't supposed to understand each other. But in that moment, something broken began to heal. Aurora made a soft sound, almost like a purr, leaning her great head against Lily's chest in a gesture of unmistakable affection. "That healing continues today," Lily said, looking up to address the audience once more. not just in Pinewood, not just through the 8 of us, but through every person who chooses to listen, to care, to remember that we share this earth with countless other voices. As if on cue, the other forest speakers stepped forward, each placing a hand on Aurora. The bear accepted their touch with serene dignity, a symbol of nature's willingness to reconnect with humanity if given the chance. "Before we end this gathering," Lily said, "we ask you to close your eyes, not to sleep, but to awaken. Listen to the breathing of the person beside you. Listen to the wind in the pines. Listen to your own heartbeat. All these rhythms are part of the same song, the song of life that connects us all." The amphitheater fell silent as hundreds of people closed their eyes, following her instruction. For a moment that seemed to stretch into eternity, there was only the sound of collective breathing, the whisper of wind, the distant call of birds returning to their nests for the night. And something else, something many would later struggle to describe. A sensation of boundaries dissolving, of connection beyond words. Some would call it spiritual, others a trick of overwrought emotions, but none would deny its power. When they opened their eyes, the 8 children stood in a perfect circle once more. Aurora, now seated in their center like a queen holding court. The setting sun bathed them all in golden light, casting long shadows across the natural stage. "We may leave this forest tomorrow," Lily concluded, her voice soft yet somehow reaching every ear, "returning to our homes across the world. But we carry this circle with us, and we will widen it day by day, person by person, until the ancient harmony is restored." As her final words faded, a haunting melody rose from the throat of Jessica Brooks, the oldest of the forest speakers. The others joined one by one, each adding their voice to a song with no words but profound meaning. A song that seemed to speak directly to something primal and often buried in the human heart. Aurora tilted her head back and added her own voice, a gentle moan that blended perfectly with the children's song. From the surrounding forest came answering calls. The howl of wolves, the chirp of birds, the rustle and movement of countless creatures joining the chorus. In the front row, Rebecca leaned against Thomas, tears flowing freely down her face. "Our daughter," she whispered. "Our extraordinary, impossible daughter." Thomas could only nod, beyond words, as he watched the little girl who had once toddled down the stairs in footed pajamas, now standing at the center of something that transcended ordinary understanding. Jacob Bennett, who had spent his life in service to the forest, felt his heart swell with a completion he had never expected to find. "The circle," he murmured. "The elders were right all along." As darkness settled over Pinewood Forest, stars appeared one by one in the deepening blue sky. And then, as if nature itself wished to place its seal on the gathering, the northern lights began to dance once more, curtains of green and purple light rippling across the heavens. The forest speakers raised their joined hands toward the celestial display, their song growing in power and beauty. Aurora rose to her full height, her massive form silhouetted against the glowing sky, her voice joining the ancient harmony. In that perfect moment, as humans and animals shared song beneath the dancing skies, the barriers between species, between cultures, between heart and mind, between past and future, seemed to dissolve like morning mist. What remained was a circle of belonging that had existed long before human memory, a circle now beginning to be restored. The first global summit of forest speakers would end the following day with practical plans. Conservation initiatives, educational programs, protection for endangered species, new paradigms for human-wildlife coexistence. Important work, necessary work. But it was this moment, this sacred wordless communion beneath the aurora, that would live forever in the hearts of all who witnessed it. A reminder that sometimes it takes a child to lead us back to wisdom we have forgotten. That compassion knows no boundaries of species or language, that the most important connections are often felt rather than explained, and that sometimes, when the world seems broken beyond repair, healing begins with the simplest of gestures, a tiny hand reaching out in the darkness to comfort a struggling heart. As the lights danced overhead and the song of forest speakers mingled with the voices of countless wild creatures, Lily Morgan looked up at the bear whose life had intersected with hers in such extraordinary ways. Aurora gazed back, her dark eyes reflecting the celestial lights, filled with an ancient wisdom and a hard-won peace. "Thank you," Lily whispered, words meant only for the bear. Aurora gently touched her nose to the child's forehead, a blessing, a benediction, a promise. And in that touch was everything that needed to be said between them, and everything that the world needed to remember. That we are never truly alone. That boundaries are more illusion than reality. That compassion has the power to heal wounds centuries in the making, and that sometimes the most profound connections begin in the most unexpected ways, like a baby and a bear meeting in the night, each recognizing in the other a kindred spirit in need of understanding. The circle was complete. And somewhere in the vastness of the universe, something long broken began at last to heal.